Hi class, with this lecture we're looking at interpersonal communication. So basically we're just looking at the differences between how we communicate face-to-face versus how we communicate online. So when it comes to interpersonal communication, it's that engagement we have with another human being. So it's a way to convey a message. That's all communication is in general. We're just giving each other messages. We're giving each other signals that signify some kind of need, want, motivation, consequence. You know, the message, of the message is going to vary on the context. You know, it's like, what are you trying to convey to that other person? And as human beings, we need that ability to be able to communicate, to be able to give each other messages. You know, that's part of how we grow, how we evolve, and it's how we create those social connections with each other. So when it comes to interpersonal communication, we have to have somebody else, at least one other person, for it to be a communication, right? And you know, it's always going to involve kind of a series of actions, or you know, a series of messages. Think of it more as when you're a child and you're developing. What is one of the main ways we learn? By people kind of telling us and by mimicking them. But you know, it's kind of that scaffolded process, or you know, it's a process of accumulation. So you know, that series of actions there, because you have to do one thing before you can get another thing accomplished. And that really is the main part of communication. You know, once again, it's we're trying to get something accomplished. As human beings, we are problem-solving individuals, and we're social creatures, so we have to find that balance of those two dimensions. And you know, then that is how we learn, grow, and reach those optimal levels of happiness, well-being, and then, you know, hopefully rise up that self-actualization ladder. And we know that when it comes to giving messages to people, it's a give and take system. So there's reciprocity involved. So it's not just dictating to somebody. You know, we need that other person to kind of bounce those messages off of, right? We need that feedback. And so then when it comes to the communication process, you know we need at least two individuals. We need some kind of information. We need a way to convey that information. And then the context of the environment is going to be crucial. And the stimulus in that environment is going to be crucial. And this is where I think that the online environment has some advantages, because sometimes when we're trying to convey a message to another person, it turns into frustration. And what does that then mean? It turns into conflict. So, you know, how we then go about communicating in a, you know, stressful, conflictual type situation, you know, the context, that context is really important, because sometimes it's okay to say, you know what, we don't need to have this conversation right now. You know, by having this conversation right now, we're not going to do anything that's positive or productive for either one of us. You know, that's the difference between unhealthy and negative arguing as compared to kind of like healthy dialogue and discord. Because, you know, you can't agree to disagree and it not be a screaming match or a knockdown, drag out fight. So I think it's, you know, the online environment gives us a little more time to maybe calm down in situations where that message, you know, intended or not, may emotionally affect us. And you know, I think the online environment is good for that, because we can take that breath. Since it is just on the computer, we don't have to react to it instantly. We can take a moment and step back and think about it. And then at the same time, like I said, even if we're in person, it's okay to be like, you know, this is not the appropriate time for this message to be delivered and interpreted. So, you know, it's okay to step away. Sorry guys, I have a little bit of cold. That's where aggression and assertive come into, it's okay to say no to people, and it's okay to say no, this is not the right time for this message, and you can still do that in a firm and kind way with, once again, not going into those more aggressive types of behavior. And now when it comes to electronically mediated interpersonal communication, it's kind of like I said, this is when we're taking that face-to-face element out of it. So a lot of times we don't have those emotional cues, and sometimes that can be a bad thing, because when we're just reading a message, we may misinterpret the way somebody is intending to convey that message, because maybe they use words that we take out of context, or maybe they deliberately use words to evoke an emotional response in us, and that makes communicating a little difficult, because in many instances we never really know what the intention of the message is. And I think that's when it comes back to just mindfulness in general, whether we're face to face or whether we are online, being mindful of our emotions, our thoughts, our behaviors, and how we transmit those verbally or typing writtenly. We always want to be mindful of how that comes across, right? And then of course when we're using technology, it's never a bad thing to think about those etiquette rules. We really want to always try to insert, once again, context, think about the environment. If it's an important message that we're trying to convey to somebody, we don't want to be disturbed by other things. Think about, okay, let's put it in the context of a therapist and a client. So you're in your therapy office and you have a client, and the client is, talking to you what they're there to talk about. Now think about how the dynamics of that situation will change if you as a therapist are playing on your cell phone. Yeah, what? Sure, Or if as the client, when you go to speak, then they're on, yeah, what? Oh, yeah, sure, doc. Or, oh, wait, I've got a phone call. Hold on, I've got to take this phone call. Think about, the way that's going to change that communication atmosphere. And what this really does? That frustrates people, because as human beings, once again, we're social, and part of that is that need of belonging. Think about Maslow and that hierarchy of need. And if we don't feel respected, we don't feel like people are giving us the same amount of attention that we feel we deserve, then we're not going to have effective communication. And then here is where online media can and using things like our cell phones and iPads can create miscommunications and disruptions in general. And it does have to do with how we choose to use those tools and when we choose to use those tools. Think about if you're in a fight with a spouse, your mate, or say a family member, say your child, it'll be, when you can sit down and actually talk to them. It's a lot different than, like I said, if they have everybody's on their cell phone and nobody's really paying attention. There it is. That's the big thing. The biggest part of communication is listening. It's paying attention. And, online communication is good because we can get that quick feedback on our messages at times, but at the same time we have to realize that it's okay to not, to take those few minutes of mindfulness, because we want to make sure that the messages and the way that we are conveying them are interpreted correctly. Because what happens when it is misinterpreted? We waste a lot of time and energy doing what? Backtracking and cleaning up and apologizing and the and stuff like that. And so what are we doing? We're not moving forward. So once again, finding that balance of how we communicate, when we communicate, and with which tools we communicate. That's important to how well we kind of, I was going to say we succeed in life. We succeed in the survival game. But what I mean about that is just what I always stress is, that's how well we reach those levels of optimal happiness and well-being in our lives. And of course that's going to change for everybody. But those main ideas of wanting to belong, wanting to feel respected, wanting to feel like people are listening to you, that's something that we all share, guys. And in order to get that, you got to give that. And so once again, it goes back to making sure that we are mindful and precise with our communication and the way that we communicate messages. That is kind of key there, right? And so this is just a little chart there that gives us some of those differences between the face-to-face versus electronic communication. And the biggest thing we say with that, I would say the two biggest things here are anonymity. A lot of times we see this negative discourse on social media, and I think it's because people feel like they kind of have greater anonymity. It's easier to sit back and vent about something that you don't really have any experience with, or just to take your frustration out on something else that's going on in your life and translate that over to some social online form, where you feel that anonymity, right? And then, of course, the bad thing about anonymity is that sometimes, as human beings, once again, that feeling of belonging, those feelings of trust people can take advantage of that online, because you have those fake accounts and things of that nature. And then those visual clues, those non-verbal cues, because sometimes we have a hard time writing down what we really intend to say. Sometimes it does come off differently, or differently from what we expect. And the main thing there is always that negative. We don't want to always come off negative and create more adversity and stress than is needed, right? And I think sometimes with that, because I think of myself and emails that I send out to students, and think of emails that I've gotten back from students, teachers, peers over the years. And I think sometimes we can be in a mindset to where we don't really know, but we think we create. That's the biggest thing about being human, guys, is we create a lot of things up here in our heads, and then we project it out and think that that's what's really going on in the real world, and it's really not. And there's another way why the internet's bad, because the internet can play into those fantasies. But what I'm talking about is that sometimes, just the mood you're in, and just not really knowing how that other person feels, because you can't see them. You think you go to that negative and think, well, that person must not like me. Look at the way they wrote that sentence. That's just a rude sentence. How dare they tell me that I need to continue working on my APA? That's just rude. Or whatever. You just because you're not focused for the message, to receive that message at the time, you just totally take it all out of context. So think about that, guys. I think a lot of times it may be us that just misinterprets what that other person actually read. And it does, once again, it comes down to that, because we may not really know their personalities, or we're not getting those visual clues to really know what that tone and that inference is. But I think a lot of times it's probably just very benign. And then mostly for me, as being an instructor, I think about it in the academic setting, and I can tell you this: the higher up you get in academia, the smarter you want to sound, and the more like, as a figure of authority you want to sound, and that's not a bad thing, but sometimes that can come off kind of abrasive and kind of cold, and it's not necessarily aggressive, but it's not assertive either. It's not assertive either. It's just that it seems just kind of abrasive and cold, and you kind of like, well, that person doesn't care about me. They're just like, they're just kind of doing their stoic thing that they're supposed to do. And really, it's not about that. It's more of this, there are these kind of professional ways that we have to present ourselves in situations. You guys can relate to this. You all have jobs to where you have to have that professional attire, and you're going to speak to bosses and coworkers differently than, say, you speak to your best friends, best mates, your lover or life partner, whatever it is, there's differences there, right, guys? We pull out different parts of our personalities, and when we get into that professional environment, we do have more of kind of that firm and stoic side to us, I think. And like I said, sometimes online that can come off as maybe uncaring and just too stoic, and it's not necessarily that. Once again, taking the time to be mindful is always a good thing. So what I think of social media, we put a lot of emphasis on it because it's a big part of our lives. But really, if we think back 100 years ago, what was a big part of people's lives 100 years ago? Newspapers, letters, diaries, books. They're not really much different than the time that we spend on the online environment. 100 years ago, when people weren't able to connect with each other as immediately, so that's the difference with social media and the internet today. We can get immediate gratification, and that's the main I think the main trick there with this tool is that it's operant conditioning. It's it's that system of rewards and punishment, and it's a little bit of Bandera and social learning theory too, because we're looking at those ideas of self-efficacy. How do we believe in ourselves and our ability to do things? And the online environment can confirm or deny that a lot quicker than say maybe talking to people face to face or sending somebody a letter. In the past, 100 years ago, when Freud was still alive, he would regularly, or Carl Jung, they would regularly get students, or not even their own students, just general students of psychology would write them letters, and they would then respond, and then a lot of times they would do these talks. But for them, once again, they didn't have social media, and they didn't have television like we do. Well, not in the beginning, not so much. My point is that when they go give these talks, they were giving it to groups of people, and then if you weren't able to get online and watch that talk as it was going, you had to wait then for that paperwork to come out and be able to read it and then be able to respond. So once again, that's where we have to be careful with the online network. It can validate the good things and the good parts of self-efficacy, and then at the opposite end of that, just like with anything human, guys, we like to go to those extremes, don't we? That's why it's all about finding that balance in those. But at the same time, social media can be contrary because it can just play into our false delusions of reality or our false illusions of self. So it comes back to figuring out which groups of individuals you're supposed to fit in with. And once again, that's not saying anything positive or negative. It's just that as human beings, we're all at different levels of development. And if you find yourself in groups where it's not, or groups or situations, atmospheres that are not helping your self-efficacy, then it's okay to find the environments and the groups that do. And the good thing about being human is because we are all at these different levels of development, and there's a lot of us, and we can connect around the world because of social media. It's easy to kind of find where you fit into society. I hope that makes sense with the way I am saying that. And then, of course, we have these basic things that we all know about the dangers of communicating online. And like I said, even in the past 100 years ago or 200 years ago, when people just had newspapers or books, there were dangers. Oh my goodness. really, if you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, it's full of propaganda. Just, people were inundated with written media trying to sway them to a certain opinion. And nowadays, we just have Facebook. I'm like, it's really not that much difference. The only difference I see is that transmission of time. And once again, that idea of this instant gratification. So, that's where we really need to stop and ask ourselves how we are using these tools that we have available to us to help us find those balances so that we are healthy, positive, and productive individuals and citizens. And it's just that, guys. It's all about finding that balance, and it's okay to not respond at time. It's okay to take the time to think about what you want to say. It's okay to say no sometimes. It's okay to be told no sometimes. It all just, I think, it really all comes down to we have to find the way to adjust and balance these tools in our own lives. And I think, the idea that too much, that it is too much, too much of anything is not healthy. Life is always about finding that balance. And so we also know that because of the online environment, that I know what I was going to say. So because that idea about that loss of privacy and security, so safety first, even when it comes onto the online environment, or even if we're face to face, we should never lose our inhibition so much that we put so much of ourselves out there that it is harmful to us in the future. So once again, mindfulness, being mindful of what we do. And then to end this slide on a positive note, I do want to say that when it comes to online networks and social media, it can be good for some types of individuals. There are introverted personalities. We know that. There are people that are a little more shy, find it a little harder to actually connect face to face with people. And so the online are just writing. Once again, 100 years ago, you had pen pals. Not even 100 years ago, guys. I'm 40, and in my lifetime, I've had plenty of pen pals before the internet came about. Everybody pretty much that I have on Facebook, we used to write letters and send Christmas cards and stuff like that, too. And I have to say that we probably use Facebook and social media like we're pen pals, and to where we don't get on it every day, kind of like this younger generation, like my little sisters who are about a decade younger than me, and they've pretty much grown up with social media and the internet, and creating these networks online. So they're a little more used to doing that, and so there's a little generational difference there in how we use the online environment. But like I said, it can be a good thing for those people who are a little shy and they have trouble initiating relationships at first. Maybe you do feel a little more comfortable writing it out before you actually then, give that message to somebody verbally, if that makes sense. So, like I said, pros and cons to everything in life, and it's about us finding what is that healthy balance for us. And so to wrap up this lecture, we know that effective communication, it's important for every aspect of our life, because communication is about conveying a message, and that message is always going to have to do with wants, needs, motivations, consequences. A lot of that's going to be internal, because because that communication, it's a give and take process, and so it's how you give it and how you receive it is all going to have an effect on how that communication takes place. The context and timing, the situation, the environment. You don't want to go out to a noisy bar, let's say with your husband, for example, and use that as the opportunity to talk about what's wrong with your marriage, right? That's not the right atmosphere. And so that's the only example I can think of off the top of my head. But you guys know what I'm saying is, and so what I'm saying is that balance and mindfulness is definitely the key to the way we communicate with each other. Compassion, respect, and understanding. And then the main thing that I think we have trouble with when it comes to communication is listening. There is a saying that goes, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we listen more and talk less. And I feel like that is very appropriate to many situations, and it's not always easy to do, guys, because when you're in the emotional moment, it's not always easy to be like, okay, we don't need to do this right now. Sometimes you gotta let it out, right? But listening is key, and it is something that I always try to do in my life with my personal and professional relationships. Always working to improve ourselves. It's just the way that, once again, we reach those levels of self-actualization. And you guys know I talk about that a lot. And I don't talk about that because I'm talking about, we personally on that personal, look at me, I'm so great, I'm self-actualized now. I'm talking about it on the level of, once you could get up there and self-actualize, these other things, supposedly, they get a lot easier. And so, you self-actualize not to bring yourself up. We self-actualize to bring others up. That's the whole purpose of compassion, respect, and understanding, and trying to be those positive and productive agents of social change. It's all about helping us all learn and grow as individuals and species, and we can't do it by ourselves, so we have to do it to help others do it too. So alright guys, that is the end of this lecture. I hope you enjoyed learning about the differences between face-to-face and online communication. If you need anything, you guys know you can always reach out to me in class. Thanks, bye.